Good morning. I'll call the order of the May 11th meeting of the Saline County Board of Commissioners. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Shadwick?
Here.
Commissioner Sparks?
Here.
Commissioner Vidrickson?
Here.
Commissioner Weiss?
Here.
Commissioner White?
Please join me for the flag salute and remain standing in a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, if everyone can make sure that all microphones, phones, and other electronic devices are muted when you are not speaking so that remote observers can hear the proceedings clearly, I would appreciate it. Now, if Brad, our IT director, could instruct everyone remotely how to raise their hand in this meeting.
Good morning. Assuming you're using the Zoom client, if you select the Participants tab at the bottom of the screen, that will reveal a raise hand function toward the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Raise your hand and that lets the host know that you'd like to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. At this time, we'll move into our citizens' input portion of the meeting where citizens may speak on county government, usually limited to 3 minutes and pertaining to items not on today's agenda. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the commission at this time?
Norman Mandelstein. I got more information on this National Heritage Area being discussed. What we're trying to do is protect the environment, conserve our energy, conserve our resources. More details and conversation is needed on Biden's 30-30 plan. So before you sign on to whichever side you want to decide on, you need to look into this more. I keep getting this information from Colorado, from the National Western Livestock Journal. So you need to read more about this before you decide one way or the other. I don't know where you are on this discussion, but look at this very carefully. It's about economic development.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Norm. Any other person like to speak? Okay. Hearing no at this time, we'll move into our consent agenda, which consists of approval of prior minutes, approval of tax roll adjustments, approval of accounts payable, approval of payroll, and approval of public forum agenda as presented. Are there any commissioner would like to remove or change the? Hearing no objection, the consent agenda will be stand as approved. Move into action items. Item 1.
Resolution 21-2329, redeclaration of state of a local public emergency with Michelle Barkley, Director of Emergency Management.
Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning, Commission. I'm here to request an additional 60-day extension to the current disaster declaration that we have for COVID-19 in Saline County. With the extension of this disaster declaration, we'll be able to continue to offer sheltering to Saline County residents as well as the region on occasion. We'll be able to continue to request testing supplies for the jail and healthcare providers that are needing it, as well as supporting the vaccine clinic as they break out into smaller pod operations.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the commissioners?
Michelle, how many do you have housed right now?
Actually, just before I came here, the last 2 that I had in quarantine had left. So as of right now, I do not have any.
Good.
Oh, good. That's a good information. Any other comments? Any members of the public who wish to speak? I will bring it back to the commission for more discussion or possible action.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve Resolution 21-2329, proclaiming a state of local public health emergency for Saline County.
It has been moved and seconded that we approve Resolution number 21-2329, redeclaration a state of local public health emergency. Are there any further comments? If not, I will call for the vote. Commissioner White? Aye. Commissioner Weiss?
Aye.
Commissioner Vidrickson?
Aye.
Commissioner Shadwick?
Aye.
Commissioner Sparks? Aye. Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Item 2. Have a great day.
RFA 163-21, 2021 bituminous crack ceiling bids with Justin Mater, County Engineer.
Good morning, Justin.
Good morning, Commissioners. So I'm here today to discuss and take action on the Saline County Road and Bridge request to award the bid for bituminous crack sealing. Sealed bids were opened on April 7th, 2021 at 11 a.m. We did receive 2 bids. In your packet, you should have a copy of the bids, which gives you more details. So as you look at the bid tabs, you will notice that there is quite a bit of difference between the total price for the 2 bidding contractors. Which is, usually when that happens, there's some cause of concern. And so, I did quite a bit of digging into the low bid contractor. Wolverine Seal Coating is a contractor up in Michigan who elected to bid on the project. And so I called them up and talked to them about their bid. And after some discussion, became aware, that their bid did not include routering the cracks, which is what we require. As well as after, and this was down the line on the conversational ways, their material that they were bidding did not meet the spec. And so that was the biggest reason for the price difference. And so after continued discussion, we determined, or they provided material that did meet the spec, and then they said that they would honor their bid price and meet our specifications for the project, which includes the routering and the appropriate material. And so then the next I asked them for references. So this is a contractor, as I said, up in Michigan. They are not a pre-qualified KDOT contractor. They haven't worked in Saline County in the past and really haven't worked in the state of Kansas. And so I asked for some references from counties that I could contact. And so I did contact 3 different counties up in Michigan. Each county worked with this contractor for multiple years. They weren't just a one and done. It was, they'd worked for the last, 3 to 5 years. And every single reference had nothing but good things to say about them. Said that their quality of work was good, when there was an issue, and there's always going to be times when there's an issue. They were very responsive, and took care of it. And so I've done quite a bit of looking into this company here. So, and this is a contractor I think we ought to consider, especially with the price difference in the bids. You're looking at about $100,000 worth of savings, and if they're willing to honor that price, this is something I'm willing to take a risk on. So if you look at the project map, that also should be in your packet. Let me get mine out. So as far as the scheduling of the projects, we have the priority ones. And so this year, what I did things a little bit different. I broke them into 1 through 5 priorities. Priority 1 roads are the roads marked in red on the project map. And these must be completed by August 1st, 2021. And the reason for that is because we're going to be chip sealing these roads as well. And so we wanted to get the crack sealing done before the chip seal contractor was coming into the county. And then all the other roads, the priority 2 through 5, which is the blue, green, and yellow on the project map, must be completed by December 17th. Again, like with most of our projects on our asphalt roads, we don't allow work during weed harvest activities. So alternatives for action, 1 would be to accept the bid as indicated in the staff recommendation. 2 would be to accept a bid from a contractor other than what staff is recommending. And 3 is to reject the bids. Staff recommends to accept the bid from Wolverine Seal Coating LLC for the amount of estimated work to equal $55,710. The funds for this project will be taken from account contractual asphalt work. This account has a current balance of $2,500,000. And so the other work that comes out of this line item is the chip seal contract, the hot mix asphalt overlay contract, and then the shouldering contract. So are there any questions?
I have one question, Justin. I'm glad to see some more people getting involved in the bidding process to help get competitive prices. This is quite competitive in nature. The traffic control numbers, can you explain the differential there?
So that was, one of my first questions on that. They're talking, $50 a day for half a day traffic control and $100. Well, and again, they're used to how they bid work up in Michigan. Up in Michigan, their price per pound of crack seal material usually includes that traffic control. And so that, their unit price of $1.16 per pound typically includes traffic control. Well, for me, I had another line item in there, and so they just put a real low dollar value in for that, is what I was told. But again, they had to, with their project specifications, it's not just the routering and the material specifications. I've got traffic control specifications in there, to where they have to provide pilot car operation. And then there's also some language in there to where if it just makes sense, we will allow, flagging operation as well.
Justin, what is the inspection process? I mean, as far as checks and balances, do we have a tech that monitors their work and?
Yes, yeah, we have I've got an engineering tech in my office, that he's responsible of the inspection process on that. And depending on the contractor, and for instance, the contractor that we've had over the last couple years and the other contractor that bid this year does very good work, and they built that trust in us to where we're not out there full time. We'll go out there and we'll check on them in the morning. We'll be out there for, an hour, hour and a half, make sure everything's going good. And then we'll check on them in the afternoon. For a contractor that we're unfamiliar with, we're going to spend a lot more time out there making sure things are going how they're supposed to be going. Because the traffic control is a big deal. You don't want traffic driving on, there's asphalt material where they can pick it up and put it on their car. And so we'll have more inspection work out there.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Justin, to say that I'm leery of this would be a gross understatement. I mean, when you're talking this much money, percentage-wise, I commend you for doing some digging regarding the company itself. Do you know if they have any other work in this area, state of Kansas?
They do not. I've asked them, and so what they've told me is so up in Michigan, because of the weather, they're never in short supply of cracks in their asphalt roads. And having that big temperature difference up there, they've got a lot of cracks, and so what that does is that's created an environment where there's just a lot of crack seal contractors. And they told me that the market up there is not good at all as far as making money, because that's their business. Their job is to make money. And so they're trying to get out of Michigan to try to make a little more profit. And so even though they haven't performed any work in Kansas, they are bidding on a lot more work this year. So they haven't received any yet, but they're trying to.
Well, if they're trying to make more money, lowballing the bid doesn't seem to be the way to go about it in my business world.
Right.
But I'm pretty leery of it. I mean, if somebody has to come, 800, 900 miles to to find work in a little, and only $55,000 job. If this is $1 million job, I'd get it. But this $55,000, I remember a while back when 4 or 5 years ago, when we bid on an excavator, a company out of Kentucky came in with about a third of the price. And, once we really got to doing the digging, why it wasn't going to work out for us. So I'm pretty leery of it myself.
Yeah, I tried to find a reason not to recommend them, and it's after every, it's just because of the risk there, and I couldn't find that, like it says they didn't have the right material, but then they said, yep, we'll use the right material. They submitted the material specifications to me, and it's, until we got to the right one, and they said, yep, we'll honor it. So I'm pretty leery about it as well.
Tell me how much work is here in terms of a crew. I mean, how many days? Is this a 2-week project? Is this a 2-month project? What is it?
So on the traffic control, and I did this a little bit different this year too. So if you look at traffic control for the full day, I've got 21 days there. They said they shouldn't take near that many. So, I mean, I've got put in 5 half days, so you're looking at, 4 weeks of work. They said it shouldn't take that long. He says they might even bring down 2 crews to where it's even takes even less. It might be a 2-week job. For the contractor that has done it in the past, it's kind of hard to say because they'll show up and they'll do some work, then they'll complete a road section and then they'll leave and then they'll come back. And so, but you gather up all of their time, it's typically about a 3-week process.
Well, I'm pretty concerned. I mean, I am one who wants to save the dollar. I'm concerned about our budget, and I want to save every dime that we can. But and $100,000 is a lot of money here. 80,000 or 97,000, I think it is.
Right.
But nonetheless, this has got a red flag all over it for me.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I agree.
And let me touch on that. Thank you, Bob, because to me, when you sit and say that you can't find anything at all to discourage it for us going this way, to me, the first thing is that, okay, they must have not read the specs very well, or they would have had the right stuff bid. I mean, I would hate to go to somebody and say, okay, I'm betting on that they're going to provide all the services and all the stuff that they say they are when they didn't read the specs to begin with. And for me, it's really tough to sit and go, they gave me the names of the people to call, and of course, I'm going to give you my 5 best ones that nobody, so it's me, I'm very leery. I would hate to do this. And with your estimate of your budget of close to $180,000, and the competitive bid was roughly $30,000 under that, I would tend to say that it's like, I would rather spend our money on a guaranteed situation, on somebody that read the specs, provided all the things, and will do the job without having a full-time person from your staff there to make sure that everything's done properly. That's my thought. Okay. All right, any other commissioners?
Yeah, the downside of that is we've always encouraged to get competitive bidding here, and we've been struggling in some of our areas, our asphalt overlays and such, to find companies willing to come in and do a competitive bidding. I know it's a gamble, I know it's a risk, but I believe the counties that you contacted would be honest and upfront with you if there was issues. With that being said, I believe that there's enough savings there that I am willing to take the risk, to give them a chance, let them establish themselves here. If they pan out, it's going to help us down the road for years to come to have competitive bidding in these type of issues, and I think we want to encourage that.
And as long as we have his insurance, he's going to hold their feet to the fire, and even with all the red flags, I'm willing to give it a gamble also.
Yeah, and they're going to be bonded. It's Worst case scenario, they come and they start doing work and they, using the wrong material, they're, they're not routering, we tell them to stop. And they refuse to do the work according to our specifications, and then we take that next step. From there, we're not gonna pay them for a job that doesn't meet our specifications. But what could happen, though, is then our roads just don't get sealed this year. I'm not saying that would be the case, because we would put out another seal job, and typically, our roads aren't sealed until towards the end of the year anyway. And so, we're not missing out on an opportunity per se. It would be just a matter of, contractors just not having the room in their schedule to do that. But I would hope that would be the case, that they could fit it in. So I would be okay with either contractor. I really would.
Okay. Are there any members of the public who'd wish to speak?
Norman Mantle, Salina. This smells all over again, just like the deal out at the county shed when you put up that new shed. You didn't take the low bid and you ended up in litigation. You had to come back and revisit, and you had to award the low bid to the low bidder.
Okay.
So as there's the legal aspect of it, because the low bidder did get the job.
Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we
Yes.
do have a hand raised in the Zoom meeting.
Okay, we'll take the Zoom first. Go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. Chad Farber here in Salina. I've been listening to this, and I have the same concerns about the low bid, but in this market where the price of everything seems to be going so much higher right now, I believe it's worth a chance to try to get that competitive bid in, try to use this company, as long as they are bonded, as long as we do have assurances that it's going to work out for us. This may be an opportunity for us down the road as well, where those competitive bids will work out better for the county. Again, that's just my input, but it's the market in which we live right now.
Okay, thank you. All right, next.
Dalton, Salina. The low bids sometimes work out very great, and sometimes they're more trouble than they're worth. I'm not an expert in this field, but I would be leery on why they're coming all the way from Michigan to here, and they've never worked for any project within the state. Have they worked for any other states in this region that have the same climate as we do?
I don't know.
They've worked in Iowa.
Okay. Yeah, pretty much.
But yeah, I would be very leery if I were.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring it back to the commission for more discussion or possible action.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to go with staff recommendation, and I move we accept Wolverine Seal Coating LLC bid in the amount of the estimated work to equal $55,710.
And I'll second the motion.
It has been moved and seconded that we approve RFA 163-21, 2021 bituminous crack sealing bids. Are there any further comments? If not, I'll call for the vote. Commissioner White,
Aye.
Commissioner Weiss,
Aye.
Commissioner Vidrickson,
Nay.
Commissioner Shadwick,
Aye.
Commissioner Sparks, nay. Approves, motion passed 3-2.
Thank you.
You bet. At this time, we'll move into informational items. Item 1.
Introduction of Cade Rensink, District Director for K-State Research and Extension.
Okay. Good morning, Cade.
Morning.
As she mentioned, my name is Cade Rensink, and I'm serving as the District Director for K-State Research and Extension here locally. We're the Central Kansas District. Appreciate the invite this morning to be in front of you and to kind of show half a face anyway. I've actually been on board since January of last year. Carl Garton, who many of you are very familiar with, retired. Left a big hole in our district, figuratively and literally. We miss Carl dearly, but he's still involved with a lot of our activities, specifically some of our youth livestock activities, the dairy show that we bring to Salina every year. He's very active with the county fair still, Tri-Rivers Fair, so we get to see Carl quite often. But obviously, like with county government, city government, COVID threw us a giant loop last year that we weren't really ready for, but I am pleased to report to you that we came out of it, or are coming out of it, I should say, feeling pretty good. COVID really required us to kind of get out of our comfort zones, and you know, the extension service here in Kansas, across the nation as well, is really the bread and butter is that face-to-face interaction, those public meetings that we have, and that's what everybody really kind of got used to. Well, we found out that our business can be handled in a little bit different fashion. We did a lot of virtual programming last year out of necessity and innovation, and I think that all of our staff got pushed to do some new things and offer some new educational objectives. And I left a folder there with you that a couple things in there I'll highlight. I wanted to make sure you got your fill of purple for today. But in there is our list of community volunteers, both from Ottawa County and Saline County, that serve on our executive board. Those would be the top 8 names. And then each of our program area, subject matter areas that we deal with, we have what's called a program development committee that is also made up of citizens from Ottawa and Saline counties. And so those are all listed to just kind of give you an idea of who we lean on pretty hard to do our jobs and get input from the community and representation of the communities. Also in there is what we call our Making a Difference report, or our impact statements that were put together for 2020. And that is just a small fraction of the different educational opportunities that we offered last year, despite the challenges that COVID presented us. And then on the other side of that folder is a small stack of program flyers that our agents and staff have planned here for the upcoming couple months. And again, that's just a few of the many that they're planning to have. So I would invite you to participate in one or all of those. I'd also encourage you to reach out to any of our volunteers that offer advice to our district. And I should mention, one of those flyers is of our flagship program. I think you're all familiar with the 4-H program. That continues to be kind of what I deem as our flagship program. We have a little over 250 4-H members across our 2 counties nowadays. We also have about 125 registered volunteers. So we still have a very large footprint with that program area. And through some great grants that we've got a 4-H innovation grant that is providing for some STEM education in our 4-H system. And so we're working really close with K-State Polytechnic on some things in the STEM world. I've got a whole laundry list of other activities here that we've got either just wrapping up or getting started, but don't want to take all your time and would welcome any questions that you have of us.
Not at this time. I don't have any, but thank you. Nice meeting you.
Yeah, great to meet you. It's kind of been on my list to do the last year. I just, A, haven't found time, and B, wasn't sure how it all operated over here, but starting to get out and about now that things are starting to ease, and meeting with the different communities in the 2 counties, and obviously the county commission. And again, appreciate the time here this morning. And if there's anything we can ever do to provide assistance with community outreach or anything, we're happy to do that. We actually are just kind of forming a relationship with the City of Salina's Community Relations Department, trying to reach out to some of the underserved audiences in the communities and kind of getting our programs and services out to a new clientele. So,
Well, and I know, being on the fair board, that you guys produce a lot of help, and that's what it's all about, is the 4-H in your department. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
Kate, I greatly appreciate you coming in, but I do have one request.
Sure.
That Carl Garton guy you were talking about, give him a bad time, please.
Every time I see him, I give him heck.
I'd greatly,
And if I don't see him, I send him an email and give him
I
heck.
would
So,
greatly appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you bet. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Okay. Next item.
City of Salina presentation on housing incentives with Mike Schrag, city manager.
Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for having us, Chairman Sparks and Commissioners. As you know, we've had some economic development successes that have been pretty exciting in the forms of Schwann's and Kubota Great Plains and One Vision in particular. And we've had a little time to see how that's played itself out in terms of their expansion plans and their projects getting under construction, and then their employment levels and the housing need that creates. And so you may have noticed or been aware that the City Commission's been having study sessions and with staff and our housing consultant over about 4 different study sessions now, as well as a strategic planning session. We didn't want to leave you out of that conversation, certainly wanted to fill you in and collaborate with you as we kind of get a picture of how things are going forward. And there's some tools we've identified. There's some processes that will involve City Commission, County Commission, School Board possibly. And so the person that's really been doing the heavy lifting for the city and on the behalf of city staff is Lauren Driscoll, our Community Development Services Director. And she's here. It has a presentation for you that I'll turn the microphone over to her and let you hear from her. It is quite a bit of detail. She's distilled, 8 to 10 hours of discussion with the City Commission down to the presentation she's making today, and then we'd be happy to take questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Good morning, Lauren.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for having us. As Mike mentioned, I have tried to condense this as much as possible, so I'm going to kind of start from the beginning and kind of walk everybody through kind of how we started and how we've gotten to the point where we're at. So, and please feel free to ask questions as we go along. Perfect. And if you could just advance one. Thank you. Here I've just summarized the economic impacts that we are having in our community that's really brought this discussion to the forefront. As Mike mentioned, we've had some economic development wins, but what does that mean exactly? For everything that's happening, there are associated reactions in the community. And so with these jobs, that's great. We're gonna have sales tax dollars, new families coming to our community, all signs of healthy communities. But these people need some place to live. And when we look at how many people are really coming, we look at One Vision, 200 new jobs. We look at Schwann's, 225 new jobs. Great Plains Manufacturing, identifying 410 positions by 2025, an additional 200 on top of that 410 by 2030. Salina 2020, as part of their research and market studies for the downtown project, identified that over its course, creating 263 new jobs. And then just overall current positions that are open, we have over 1,000 positions representing 384 employers in Saline County. And why that number at the bottom, that unemployment number is really relevant, is all these open positions need to be filled, and our unemployment rate is that low. So we can only fill so many of these needed jobs from Saline County. We're gonna have to have people come to the community. Some of these will be from neighboring communities, Lindsborg, Bennington, maybe McPherson, but the majorities are gonna have to come from farther out, and they're gonna need houses. And so that's how we get started on this discussion. Next slide, please. So in 2016, the City Commission adopted a housing plan. We call it the Live Salina Plan. And what I've highlighted here, just to kind of give you a little throwback of the numbers that were presented to us in 2016. And basically looking at 2 kind of time periods, or actually 3, of when we would need housing and how much we should ideally be creating throughout that time period. I can tell you right now we're behind. And knowing that that study from 2016 didn't take into consideration these new jobs, we wanted to make sure that we were working and making decisions from current data. So we called RDG, who is a planning and consulting firm out of Nebraska, and asked them to come back and work with us and update our plan. And the first part of that is updating the data itself, and then talking to us about some type of housing policy, so that as we looked at incentives and things like that, as we realized those were becoming more common tools, how should we be using those? What was the best way to be using those? And were there ones we didn't know about? I also think this is kind of interesting, because when we talk about housing, we're not just talking about ownership, which is what we commonly think about. We also need to think about rental, because that's an important thing, especially when you have transient population starting to come in, is if we're behind on owner-occupied housing, we need time to build that. And so you probably need rentals to be able to accommodate people while they're finding something. Not to mention, if somebody's coming to work for Schwann's or for Great Plains for a 3-year stint maybe, with Kubota now being part of Great Plains, a 3-year term for a Japanese employee is not an uncommon thing. So where would they stay? If you're not familiar with our apartment or rental stock, apartment complex in general, almost 90% of them in the city of Salina are either age or income restricted. So they're part of some type of HUD program or part of something like low-income housing tax credit, which is a Housing Resource Corporation taxing entity that requires you make low to moderate, actually low to low income. So if you're in these job ranges, these price ranges that we saw when we were looking at the number of jobs coming, if you're making $50,000, $60,000 a year, you wouldn't qualify for any of those available units. So that is definitely part of a challenge. We do have some rental stock in individually owned homes, but that's not always what somebody wants to rent. Majority of those require that you own a lawnmower, and you're really going to kind of basically be a homeowner without owning a home, rather than an apartment complex where somebody's plowing everything and mowing the grass, and you're just walking up the steps and moving right in kind of thing. So thinking about what that future employee really needs and what the market is looking for are some things to consider in our, what we call housing stock. It's that overall types of housing we have available. And just to show you too, rental apartments in that kind of the more traditional apartment complex situation, we haven't produced any, we produced less than 350 new housing units total. And then of those, 103 new single-family residential, including 2 apartment complexes. Willow Grove had 48 units, and Heritage at Hawthorne, 16 units. And why I'm not including things like Brian Richardson's done on Iron and things like that is those were existing units, so they're not new units that were added. He redid projects. I think maybe what we're not including in there, because it hasn't been finished yet, is the project that he's doing over off of Highland where he's renovating the school. Those will be apartment or rental units or leases, I think. But in general, we aren't producing a lot of new units. The Lee Loft buildings, that's a LIHTC project, so low-income housing tax credit. Only a portion of those are market rate apartments. The rest of those are, then again, income required. Next slide, please. So I mentioned we needed some new data. Next slide, please. This slide, if you've had a chance to look through this, just kind of captures why we went back to work with RDG and really what we're trying to do. Next slide, please. So when you start to update data, you have to make some assumptions, right? There are things that we have to put into this equation to really understand what's going on. We took a very conservative annual growth rate. The previous Live Salina plan had gone at 0.5% for annual growth rate, and we backed that down even less, just to make sure. Numbers have been, I don't want to call them sketchy, but they've been really difficult to get the last couple of years. I think there's a lot of question about the upcoming census data, and the fact that we're using data, if you use the current census data, it's 10 years old. And you can use American Fact Finder and some of those things, but whether we're gaining population or losing population is up for considerable debate. So we wanted to not overextend or overestimate, so we went with a very conservative growth rate of 0.36%. so that we weren't overestimating. But we did include those new growth from the industrial expansion. And what I will add a little note for is, if you know anything about economic development, it often begets more economic development, especially with large employers like this. You'll often have subsidiary businesses that start to see where that expansion is and want to expand themselves. Or as a business is expanding, it realizes there are other opportunities, and while they're in construction, they might as well add this. And since both of these projects are still in the works, I think it is worth anticipating some additional numbers there, or just being aware of them. Part of the conversation we've been having with the commission is, these are numbers for now. That doesn't mean we don't need to look at these again annually or biannually to make sure they're still current if more things are happening. And then just looking at our overall household population and what our demands are, with 3% of the population in group quarters, skilled nursing, dormitories. So that's basically kind of taking out of the estimates students in dorms, folks in assisted living or senior housing, things like that, or different types of group homes where people may be living in a non-traditional rental environment or ownership situation. And though that percentage is consistent with the American Community Survey, which is part of the census. Next slide, please. Constant vacancy rate. I mean, so this number also comes from the American Community Survey, and we went with that rate, I think because as a state, we don't permit rentals, and we don't always have the best data on how many we have and what full vacancy is, because we can't just look at our apartment complexes. We have a lot of individual homes being rented, and we don't always have that data. We don't really know if 6% is our truest vacancy rate, but we went with that as an average just to make sure that we included in that. And as part of your demographics, that vacancy rate's important because it's recognizing that any one time, if you take all of your stock, you have a certain percent of vacancy available. Do I think it's quite as high? No, but I happen to have day-to-day interaction with some of these. But as part of our demographics, it's a good conservative number, and it makes sure that that's at least part of the demographics. And then when we look at replacement rate, that's just something that's naturally occurring, right? So, building gets demolished, it gets replaced. If you have your replacement rate really low, that means you're probably getting rid of more buildings a year than you're replacing them with. So trying to kind of look at that. And then occupancy assumptions. We made, looking at the next 10 years, and we came up with that model based on kind of what the employers are telling us, right? They're saying, I will hire these amount of people by 2030. And that's usually a number most of us can get our heads wrapped around. So we're looking at kind of 2 5-year blocks, now 2025 and 26 to 30. And within those blocks, that first 5 years, we're just cutting it right down the middle. 50% ownership, 50% rental, knowing that both of those are very needed. And as we have new people, especially coming in that first 5-year window, rentals will probably be more needed. That's the other thing we know just from economic development and other communities. When you are setting up an expansion of an existing business or a new portion of that business, you're going to have an influx of people that are here for 3 to 5 years, not necessarily the long haul, because you need those extra people to set up the company, do some of those initial trainings, things like that. So again, rental would be more prolific in that first 5-year window. And then in the second 5-year window, we did a 60-40 split on ownership and rental, with more on the ownership side and less on rental. Next slide, please. So, knowing that, our consultant has suggested this development plan. So what you're looking at the top is ownership units, and then at the bottom, rental units, and then that's broken up by price points. So under ownership, we're looking at price of a home, and then under rental, we're looking at monthly rents. As you can see, what's kind of interesting is when I worked in a lot of other communities, you usually have a niche piece that you have a housing problem in. You're lacking senior housing, or you're lacking first-time home buyer housing, or maybe a particular price point. We're not lacking, we need them all. We could use every one of them. And in our case, housing stock, we also say housing ladder is really important, because opening up certain opportunities at different unit prices move individuals from a different price point. So for instance, if you're in a home, an older home, and you're kind of ready to downsize, but you can't move into something else, right? Where either we don't have a smaller house in the market, or we don't have a rental option because you'd like to spend the winters in Arizona, whatever that is. So you're still in a house. Well, that's a house a first-time home buyer could be in. Or maybe you'd like a newer home in one of the different areas of town closer to your grandkids, but you can't find anything. So again, you're still sticking to this house. If we've got more housing stock, people start to move around, and it starts to shuffle out the market a bit more. And that's something to kind of be considered, because right now, on average, if you talk to any of the realtors in town, our average home on the market number is between 30 and 40. That's a really, really small number. I mean, ideally, we'd like 100 to 150. So the fact that a community our size, that we're hovering at available housing stock of 30 units for ownership, and that means, so when somebody's looking at a home, of those 30, I mean, how many match their criteria, right? So that's a real challenge if you're coming into the community. So again, kind of getting that stock moving by adding units, getting people to move throughout that also starts to alleviate some of the pressure points. So in total, if we look at ownership and we look at rental units and we look at those 2 5-year windows, you can see how that 50-50 split goes, and then the 60-40 split goes, and then that total needed. I will tell you, if you're trying to think about this and round up a little, the first 5 years, we need 1,000 units. Second 5 years, you need 500 units, and just call it 1,500. Because by the time this kind of comes back and forth, and I wouldn't mind having a little bit of wiggle room in the market so that we're not so tight all the time. So that's one way to kind of think of it too. But those are the exact numbers based on the consultant's demographics. Next slide, please. So what does this look like? I think that's the other thing is we have pretty standardized product. And when I talk about product, I mean townhomes, apartment complexes, condos, patio style homes, traditional single family homes. I mean, there's a lot of different stuff out there, but we're kind of predictable. I mean, you pretty much know what's going to be on the market. So part of the study asks, to get to these different price points, both in rental and in ownership, do you need to add different product? Because if a home, a traditional single-family residential home in town is going for $250,000 or $300,000, and that's just what it costs, do you need to build a different product to get to some of those different price points maybe that are lower than that? And maybe that's building a townhouse where you've got shared walls, or you're building more dense units so that you've got an economy of scale, for instance, in your development. So that's also something the consultant looked at. Next slide, please. And I always like a picture. I think it helps to kind of see these things. These are just examples of the different kinds of housing forms. So when we say conventional single family, when we say small lot single family, that's definitely leading to that density discussion. When you take a house and we make that lot a lot smaller, you take that property's cost and you make it smaller because you're not having to buy all that land. And we're getting more units benefiting from the infrastructure investment. And then we've got single family attached, so commonly seen as townhomes. And then townhomes in more of the row house style is another option. High density townhomes, we're going a little bit more vertical. Traditional multifamily, a complex built ground up, or something that's being rehabbed, an older building. Schools are a great example. So those are some different forms of housing. And and part of looking at this housing policy is Do we need to incentivize different products in addition to the other things we're talking about? Next slide, please. So this is all great, but then how do you get this to occur in your community? So one of the questions we had to ask ourselves is, what tools are in our toolbox for incentivizing housing? Because I'm going to get to in a minute how we are not the only ones looking for housing right now, and why this is kind of a very unique challenge. But things we have done or can do because we have state statute that allows it, or we've already adopted city code or statute or ordinances that do that. So some type of tax abatement or increment scenario. This is often property tax. So these all vary a little, but we're going to talk specifically about RHID today, which is Rural Housing Incentive District. The other one is Neighborhood Revitalization Area. We have one of those, but that is geographically, you have to set your boundaries and it can only happen within the boundaries. So if it's outside of it, you can't use the NRA. And then there's IRBs, Industrial Revenue Bonds, and I'm sure you guys are fairly familiar with that. So IRBs only apply to multifamily because that's a commercial project if it's done in a certain scale, pretty much anything over 4 units. So IRBs can apply to multifamily, but not to single-family residential. We could reduce construction cost. IRB is a good method of doing that because within IRB you can eliminate sales tax. So that is a unique feature of that. We can waive permit fees. That is something that happens within the SRA, which is another geographical district like the NRA, but we can also, as the city commission, can also waive fees if that's requested. Special assessment district, we commonly refer and use CIDs. The only time I've seen CIDs used in housing is usually in a more urbanized area where you've got mixed use, you've got some commercial in there, because commonly it's a tax that's kind of added within the area that everybody's agreeing to pay that helps to pay for those improvements. And then lastly, a land bank. We have a land bank. This can be helpful when dealing with property costs. You know, let's say there's a great piece of property out there, but it's got tax issues, particularly like ad valorem taxes. The land can be moved in the land bank. Land bank washes it of those taxes and allows that to be repurposed however that may need to happen. Sometimes it just holds property. We could get into a whole nother PowerPoint on how to use land banks, but we have one. So that is an option and can be helpful in certain situations. Things we don't know a lot about or we haven't used before is state grants and programs. Things like MIH, Moderate Income Housing, is a program that's run out of the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation's Housing Trust Fund. It's roughly $2 million a year that you can apply as a city on behalf of a developer for grants or loans related to a project. It's interesting, moderate is a really important word there. It doesn't have a big fixation on the price point of houses. It's basically trying to help Western Kansas build houses because it can be such a challenge out there. So even if it's a $250,000 house, $300,000 house, certain times the MIH can't apply. So, but it does have some restrictions on how large a city and things like that. But we do qualify for MIH. Historic tax credits. We've done several of these and they can be very beneficial. I mean, if you can qualify for state and federal, you can pretty much defer about 50% of taxes. So it can be very beneficial. Higher density, do we just promote higher density? Do we adjust zoning to make more high density areas? Is that something we can do? Free land, do we have property that we could give to this to say, look, here's the land, can you bring prices down or build faster because you're not looking for a piece of ground? Deferred cash or return on investment, these are sometimes where things get complicated. And I'll say we have not explored this. We've explored this the least, and it's kind of one of the things we're just starting to get into with our consultant, because when we start to talk about gap and risk that the developers are talking about, a lot of times it has to do with cash, it has to do with equity in the project, and some of those things that are really, it's the equation of how do they make a project work. And so interest rates, things like that, how do we, if that's the problem, is there some tool for us to address that? We're not sure yet. We're we're looking at that, definitely. I mentioned interest rate. You know, we've had a couple developers say, look, I can get 4.5, but if you can get 2%, that would make the deal work. We don't know if there's a way to do that, how that works. That's definitely something on the unknown that we're looking at. And then longer loan terms, you know, being able to kind of stretch out the terms in which that's being borrowed, preferably at a lower rate. Some of the things that we've started to have discussions on that kind of address some of those things in the bottom, it definitely doesn't need to be the city or the county, is also starting to work with local banks on maybe a possible consortium. And you can use those a couple different ways, whether they're for really big projects or for helping smaller projects like infill development, you know, maybe flipping houses, things like that. Next slide, please. So you might be thinking, wow, Lauren, that's really interesting. It sounds like you have a lot of demand. I don't know why we need to incentivize this. Shouldn't the market take care of itself? It's a very fair question to ask. Next slide, please. The thing is there are some very, very unique things occurring right now. The entire country needs housing. It is not just Western Kansas, it is not just rural communities, it is not just big cities. The entire country needs housing. And that is a serious demand. And then on top of that, a year and a half of COVID restrictions has caused serious consequences in supply chains. It's caused serious consequences in labor market. I don't know if you can find a builder right now who will tell you that they've got enough people to do what they need to do. We also have some really interesting things going on with material prices beyond just shortages, things that we don't realize come from other countries that are just caught up in supply chain problems are out there. The other issue is the cost of materials. Steel is through the roof, and so is timber. Timber is predominantly related to the fact of the fires, hurricanes we've seen out west, and then just the national demand for housing has just put such a strain on the market. And I mean, we're talking to state representatives about the fact of looking at, you know, tariffs that we've got on timber coming from other countries because these prices are kind of insane. The other thing is steel. I mean, the majority of our mills aren't in America anymore, and so steel's being imported, and it's also very high. And it's one of the first times where both products are very high. Often when timber is being hit, steel balances out and we start doing steel framing and different things like that, but both are high right now. Concrete has been progressively high over the last 5 years, and we're also low on suppliers in this area. So lots and lots of challenges, not to mention just our general geography. We're not a suburb. We're just far enough away from Wichita that, you know, for somebody to bring a crew up here to do something is just, is it worth it? And then this gets down to this word risk. And it kind of summarizes these next couple of slides, is when you start to talk to housing developers about what makes and breaks their decision, it's risk. And if they can do the same project in Wichita, same project in Manhattan, for less cost and less risk, why would you go here? Not that we aren't interesting or have good quality of life, or that they couldn't, you know, if they really work hard, make it work, but the assurances that it will work are also less. I mean, one of the things is we haven't developed market rate rentals in years. I mean, if we try to look at examples, you can pull that small handful of units in the Lee Loft building, but in general, there's not a lot to say. Somebody just came in and did market rate apartments. Can we get a loan and do the same thing in Saline? And the bank's gonna look at that and go, there's really no comps for that. It looks risky. There's that word again, risk. So again, if you could go do the same project in Wichita, same project somewhere else, know you're gonna make money, have less risk, have less trouble with supplies or labor, that's where you're gonna go. So this gets into incentives and looking at how they can help mitigate risk. Next slide, please. So where that risk lives is a variety of different places. It can live at this podium. I mean, one of the things we can do to lower risk, and it's one of the things the city's working on right now, is adopting a housing policy that gives parameters on the type of things that we would want to incentivize. Using these numbers that are in the Live Salina plan to say, we'll incentivize up to that and the rest is on you. We know what we need. If anything more, the market will take care of that kind of thing. Or recognizing that where we want to mitigate risk is with property tax or, working with banks to form the consortium or, a whole litany of things. I mean, how we incentivize infill versus greenfield development is also very different. But understanding that risk and starting to mitigate it is a big part of this discussion. Next. I think the other thing I should have probably touched on that slide is also employers. I think one of the things that we're also starting to have discussions with is with these employers that are bringing all these new folks to town, what is their relationship to housing development? And do they want to have a relationship and what does that look like? We have some good examples we've been sharing with the commission about employer incentivized housing. It really comes in just about every shade of the rainbow as far as how an employer can get involved in something like that, from owning the land to building the houses to putting in cash up front, being a silent partner, to helping to pay part of annual rentals, things like that. So it's really kind of runs the gamut. That's kind of part of this long-term conversation. And this slide kind of leads to what I was saying earlier is, as you start to develop a policy, what are the things that you want to address that really start to fix the problems that the Live Salina plan identifies, particularly our numbers? Can we affect density? Can we affect the different types of housing? How about how fast they're being built? If you're going to build 100 units over the next 5 years, yeah, I need you to move along. We need more units than that. Scale, do you incentivize 20 units or 100 units? Is one more worth it? If you need a lot of units that first year, maybe you're incentivizing scale just to get units moving, and then you can tailor your policy that after you've reached a certain point, you could do smaller scaled projects, things like that. Those are things to consider. Rental versus ownership, rental rates. And our consultant uses the word preservation, but I think we more commonly use the word infill development. I will tell you, they're different problems to solve. Both feed into the bigger housing issue, but the problems to do infill, where we take existing housing stock, rehab that and get that back on the market, or we take vacant lots and we put duplexes or fourplexes on those, there are not as many programs out there for that, and of those, they just take a bit more kind of human capital to run them. So that is definitely part of our long-term policy development. But when we look at those windows, maybe year 1 and 2, you're probably not going to see that. It's probably closer to year 4, 5, and beyond. Next slide, please. And so this just talks about really getting our ducks in a row with a housing policy. But when the commission began this conversation in February, they said to us, if you've got somebody who seems to have a project, it's viable, it meets our criteria, and it wants to use an existing housing incentive, we will see it. Even if we don't have a policy adopted yet, we don't want to hold up possible projects in waiting of a policy. So we acknowledge that. We're still moving forward with the policy, and I think I've talked about what's going to be in that. The City Commission is meeting in a study session with Marty Schuchert, our consultant, on Monday, the 17th. It'll start at 2 and go right up to 4, but Marty's really going to go over that overarching policy framework based on the commission's feedback, get them to kind of bless that, and then we'll start to flesh out the policy. And then within that policy will be each specific tool as we develop that. So RHID, or if we're willing to do MIH or not, or in these circumstances, you start to get into the nitty-gritties of each of those. The other things our policy is going to do is demonstrate demand to engage with the builders and also look at more diverse areas. All parts of town could use some type of housing. Reducing those risk factors, engaging industries generating the demand, those are those employers, diversifying the products, and then conserve and rehabilitate existing units. You know, you may have seen in that table when it was talking about price points, and there's some really low ones in there, and you're like, I don't know how you're gonna make it to $625 a month, Lauren. Or, you know, $150,000 for a house. How we do that is existing housing stock. You know, if you take a $30,000, $40,000 house in North Salina, you can rehab that to a perfectly good home, $90,000 to $100,000. That's where we start to get into real affordable housing, but those projects and products take a little bit more. So, I promise I'm almost done. A lot of stuff to get over, so. Next slide, please. Okay, RHIDs. The two incentive requests the commission had in front of them last Monday? Yeah, last Monday are RHID requests. I'm gonna really sink down RHID in just a couple slides and then talk to you about the two applications. And I think what you'll see as we talk about these is why we're here in front of you, because you are part of this, particularly with this incentive project. Next slide, please. So, this is in Kansas statute, came out of the late 90s. One way to think of RHID is TIF for housing. So if you're familiar with TIF and have seen it used for commercial, we have one, a TIF district over Kohl's here in the city. It's very similar to that. And we are probably the largest city within the applicable demographic to be able to apply RHID. As you'll see, it's cities in Kansas with a population less than 60,000, in a county less than 80,000. So realistically, we're probably the biggest kids on the block there. So it does get a little challenging. RHID captures 100% of the incremental increase in real property tax created by the housing development project for, actually, that should be not just 15 years, but 25, sorry. There's been some changes recently, so that can actually go up to 25. In order to take advantage of incentives, property must be within a district. And then the districts are defined by a city or a county based on a housing needs analysis. Next slide. So what could you use your RHID money to do? It's not everything. There's very particular uses. I think the easiest way to remember it is you can acquire property and you can do infrastructure. So site preparation's probably kind of the glue that holds that all together. So you can basically buy the property, prep the site, and then get stuff installed. And when we think of infrastructure, we often think of like what we use for specials, so roads, water, sewer, but you can also use private utilities, so lighting, gas, electrical, those types of things. You'd work with those suppliers. But it is not to be used for structures at all. So if you're familiar with IRBs, where you could kind of do the whole kit and caboodle, this is different. Both property tax, but RHID is just to this very specific list. Next slide. So just to kind of recap, captures 100% of the real property tax. It does take out, and we'll see as we kind of do a numbers analysis towards the end, the 1.5 mils for the state, and then the school district has 20 mils in there, and that's related to their capital improvement. So it's not all the school district's money, it's just a certain portion. And then all taxing districts are included, and up to 25 years, and financed by bonds or pay-as-you-go. We've made it pretty clear that the only option I'm 99% sure it will be the policy that we will only do pay-as-you-go. So that means that, you know, it's paced along the length of the project. Okay, next slide, please. So, effects on the taxing entities. So all taxing districts are held harmless at base property tax level. So this came up the other days. If we had a piece of property that is taxed currently as agriculture,
Is it that agricultural rate versus the new residential improved rate? The answer is yes. There's also a level that's not ag, but it's also not fully improved. So we'll talk about one of the properties here that it falls into that category too, which is a lower taxing category. So at the expiration, so that can be negotiated too. So the developer comes in and says, hey, I want 15 years of RHID at 100%, 50%, whatever that is. There can be a counter to that. You know, and our policy could say, we don't do RHIDs past 15 years. I don't know. But that's one way for a community to kind of gauge how it wants to use an RHID, is that length of time and also the percentage of which it's done. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to add these slides because they just talk a little bit about when we're thinking about property tax and abating that, the question is, are we getting enough sales tax in to justify, you know, taking on, or I should say not taking on, but letting go of some tax dollars. And I think this is just helpful to kind of think about where those dollars are going. We are reaching out to 2 entities at Fort Hays and Wichita State. Yep. Yeah, Wichita State, that do demographic, particularly economic analysis, just trying to see, based on these number of units that the housing plan is saying we need, what is the potential economic impact of their sales tax dollars and things like that, to see where those kind of balance out. Does that make sense? Next slide, please. And this is just really taking those tax dollars down locally, looking at it from the property tax distribution side. And I'm sure you guys are very familiar with these. Next. So we have started this process. So as of last Monday, we're at the orange stage. So preparation of a housing needs analysis, the state statute is very vague. It just says you have to demonstrate that you have housing issues. We've done that through the Live Salina plan and the demographics that we've updated with our consultants. So that is our housing need analysis. And then a resolution of finding a shortage of quality housing. The city commission acted on 2 resolutions Monday night that identify that in these 2 chosen areas that we have a shortage of quality housing, and they are willing to form that district. That then goes to Secretary of Commerce to approve our findings and basically say a district could be formed there. That's all that's done at that point. It's just lines on the map that says this spot qualifies as an RHID district. Then we get into negotiations for the development agreement, and that's where you start having conversations about some of those other things we talked about, you know, if there's clawbacks or time stipulations, you know, how quickly the stuff's getting developed, all those little details, you know, 15 years, 25 years, 100%, 10%, that kind of stuff. Once that's all figured out, a part of that, as required by state statute, is also something called the development plan for the district. And that's just something that's created in conjunction with the development agreement. Then a resolution calling for a public hearing on the district and the adoption of the plan must be done 30 to 70 days prior to the public hearing. So once we knew whereabouts the development agreement was in the kind of that wrapping things up, you have to calendar out and make sure we've got a resolution that's calling for the public hearing date. Once that's called, notice must be given to school district, county, in our case, planning commission, so a variety of sources so everybody knows what's going on. And then we also have to publish in the paper, so not less than 1 week and no more than 2 weeks prior to the public hearing. And then the public hearing is held, and that's when the commission decides to adopt the plan and the ordinance that create the district and decide to pursue the development agreement as negotiated. Following that, there's a 30-day protest period, and that's predominantly for the county and the school district to protest that. And it's my understanding if that protest occurs, everything stops and we basically go back to the drawing board. So Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have 2 current requests. Next slide, please. The first one is called Magnolia Point. This property, many of you will be familiar with it. It's visible from the highway. It's in front of the Fairfield Inn and next to Menards. And that is currently within city limits. It is unplatted and it is zoned C5. The project is being proposed by Perry Reed Construction. They're established full-service multifamily developer working throughout the Midwest. They do a lot of work in Iowa and Nebraska. And they actually just purchased from Overland Property Group the Chapel Ridge Apartments and the Reserve at Prairie Glen Apartments. So that means they already have a presence in the community and have the capacity to do property management as well as construction. These will be rental units, 168 of them, and their estimated construction duration for all 168 units is 24 months. And in trying to kind of condense this down, I didn't put everything in there, but if you can imagine that there's a driveway that kind of curves with the property, and there's roughly 6 buildings, 3 on each side of that driveway for the property. The total project cost is roughly $22 million. And when they say roughly, just with construction materials kind of up and down all over the place, we're trying to estimate as much as possible. And then there's a breakdown of land acquisition costs, building infrastructure and other hard construction costs, and then soft costs. Next slide, please. The second property is Ryan Addition. This is a fairly well-known property as well on the corner of Ohio and Schilling. This is within city limits. It is platted, and it is zoned R1, R2, and PC5. If you don't mind me, I'm gonna kind of go up just easier this way. So this little funky corner piece right here is the PC5, which is a planned commercial. And then the R1 and R2 break up like that.
Is that the southwest corner?
Southeast.
East, yes.
It's immediately adjacent to our
300 acres.
And that's being proposed by Southview Estates LLC, and this is a group of local builders and developers, including Stan Byquist, Kelly Dunn, Craig Piercy, and Todd Roberg. This will be owner-occupied units. There are 108 units total. There are 42 single-family residential and 66 units of townhomes. They are trying to keep their price points for the single-family home at under $210,000 and the townhomes less. With construction material costs kind of all over the place, they've been hoping for $200,000 and maybe a little under. With a construction duration of 36 months, all infrastructure they would have done within the first phase of construction. And then their total project cost is a little over $20,535,495. And then land acquisition, building construction costs, infrastructure, and soft costs break down as follows. I think it's also worth noting, same incentive tool, but definitely different business models for duration and how you see as a developer doing these, how you're seeing your costs being recouped. Because in the apartment world or rental world, you have a longer term investment in something, both from not only just construction, but also the managing of it, versus when you're selling owner occupied, you need a faster turnaround on that product. Once it sells, it needs to be able to repay itself. Next. So fiscal impact, finally getting to the juicy details. Magnolia Point, which is the apartments, is asking for 10 years at 100%. And the Ryan Addition, which is owner occupied, is asking for 25 years at 100%. So if we look at Magnolia, you can see the total appraised value is almost $14 million. And then looking at that total tax over 10 years, and then if we break it down into all those taxing districts, minus those that are not applicable, you can see the county in orange. It's really quite tiny. But for Magnolia Point, over the 10 years, it would be $616,226.30 of property tax that is captured. For the Ryan Edition, which is 25 years at 100%, we have total appraised value at almost 20 million. And then if we do a breakdown of all the different taxing entities, in that case, the county's at $2,076,844.63.
I hate to interrupt you, Lauren, but I'm losing something here. When you're looking for 25 years at 100% or 10 years at 100%, and those units have been sold, why are we going to give the homeowner the tax break? I can see the developer needing the tax break up and until the point that that unit is sold, but tell me why then that tax break needs to continue. Why can't the homeowner pay that? Or am I missing something there?
No, it's a good question. Part of what makes RHID a positive for owner occupied is we're bringing down that infrastructure cost, because basically they're covering what specials would normally cover. So if the house is selling for $200,000 and then specials on top of that is another $30,000, you're at $230,000, and that might be out of the bracket in which we're trying to incentivize. If we're trying to get people into $200,000 homes, doing the RHID brings that home value down. So that, but in order to get it to where it needs to be, you have to do the full 25 years in order for the developer to have it, make it work. Does that answer your question?
So in other words, the tax break is on these specials, not on the property itself in terms of the home. If you have a $200,000 home there, and I understand the specials that are involved with that. That's where the tax break comes in, but there's still a tax on the home. Am I correct?
Yeah, if this helps, in that scenario, the developer is going to take out a $20 million loan, or probably even larger than 20 million. The taxes would still be paid by the homeowner. In return for the RHID financing, they're agreeing to a housing type and a target price point, so trying to get that price point down. But then the developer will continue to get that increment to help offset the loan they took out over those 25 years of the life of the RHID. So the homeowner would pay property taxes like they always would.
Okay.
We're agreeing to take that increment and apply it back to the developer over the 25 years to help offset, to incentivize them to take on the project in the first place.
In years back, that has been something that the city has taken on as far as the infrastructure, the specials. They have financed that. Is that correct?
Well, in years past, we've made available special assessment financing, and so in addition to the property taxes, the homeowner then paid a special assessment above and beyond that, and it is similar in format. The added approach here is two things, really, to try to get the cost down, where special assessments were just an added cost, and then also to incentivize particular housing products and a scale and a pace of development that developers haven't been taking on before.
And there are certain things in RHID that aren't necessarily under specials, like
That's
land
right.
acquisition,
Electric, gas.
and site prep, things like that. So they can take more of those costs and bundle them in.
So in general, the taxpayer in Saline County is the one that's going to pick up the tab for the special. No,
All of
am
the
I correct?
taxing entities that are subject to the RHID, yes, it wouldn't be a check that had to be written, it would be revenue that'd be foregone, but yes.
Well, I think the difference too is to think between, like, IRB is an abatement. Like, basically you're not going to collect property tax in an IRB situation. In an RHID, we're capturing the increment, the difference, and redistributing it back, correct?
Thank you.
Next slide. Yes, okay. so-
If I could actually jump in, your timing was
You
good.
were so close.
I've got a few notes as the presentation went on that if I could, just to touch on to kind of help fill out some details. One of the slides it had the information in it, but want to make sure that you're aware, in the modeling that was done by our housing consultant, there was a base assumption that only 40% of the employees that are taking on these new jobs are locating in Salina. So our numbers assume 60% of that's going to happen outside of Salina, and we still have identified that, that number need. And then the slide that had the price points of different types of housing, that was based on our consultant's analysis of income levels in the community. And so in addition to just identifying the number of units, they're taking into account our current income levels and the income levels of the jobs being created and what's affordable rental rates or home mortgage payment rates. We did specifically ask the housing consultant to model these scenarios, because we've got developers coming to us saying they can't get the numbers to work. We wanted a third-party objective assessment. And so they modeled in great detail a apartment scenario, and basically came back with 900 square foot apartments at $1,600 a month using Salina's, what we currently know about our prices. And so that kind of confirmed that the market isn't going to be able to just kind of sustain itself. There's a reference to grants as a possible funding source. One of the things that we've discussed with the City Commission is with the American Rescue Plan, are there grant funds that might be able to be available. What we've said is, as we negotiate a development agreement, we want to be sure to be mindful of that, so that the scenario, the assumption is RHID financing, but if an alternate source becomes available, we want to reserve the right to use that and take out the RHID financing. Lauren mentioned that the City Commission had said that we want to run kind of a dual track of entertaining proposals and developing the policy, recognizing it's going to take a while to get the policy developed. I would tell you the employers have also implored us to do that. The concern is building about their ability to find employees, house employees, and take on the expansions that they've committed to. And then lastly, as we develop the policy, the City Commission was very clear in strategic planning that we want to collaborate with the county once we start to flesh out the policy. And that's why we're here today, rather than just run the whole process and send you a notice of the public hearing when the state statute says we have to. We wanted to be, get engaged early on and have a collaborative conversation with you. So with that, I would be happy to try to answer questions.
Yeah, I'll just tack on to Mike's comment there on the American Rescue Plan. I mean, that slide had some costs that we would, well, they're not costs, they're foregone revenues that we would incur over the period of the requests from the developers. Certainly, those requests are all still subject to negotiation, but one of the questions that I've posed to Mike is, hey, the county is getting $10.5 million in federal funding that says it can be used for water and wastewater infrastructure. If we just cut a check for $601,000 out of this federal money, could we buy our way out of an RHID and collect our property taxes over the next 10 to 25 years? And I think that's something that they're still running down with bond counsel, whether that's possible, but that's just a thing that we have kind of a unique opportunity right now because of that federal funding.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily have the details, but I think if that's something the county wanted to pursue, I'm optimistic that we could find a way to either do it on the front end. You could hold back those funds and subsidize that foregone revenue. I think we could find a way. Creative accounting is usually a bad term, but I think we can get creative and figure something out if that's what your interest is.
Okay, I got a couple of questions, short ones, I hope. The 3.4% unemployment that is in Saline County at this time, what percentage of that is unemployable?
That is a really good point. I've heard Eric Brown kind of break that number down in greater detail. And number one, 3.4% of our population just isn't a big number to begin with. And then you start dealing with people that have voluntarily taken themselves out of the job market, or they're unemployable. That number gets real small real fast.
So we're approaching 0% unemployment, really, is what it amounts to.
I can tell you, as an employer, we struggle to find quality candidates. I know others are as well.
Okay. And I guess my concern or my question is, and you're not going to be able to answer this too much, I don't think, but what are you looking for from Saline County? Where do we fit in this process, other than the fact that are we just a vote that says, yes, let's do it, or no, we're not going to do it?
Well, first of all, what I didn't want you to do is read it in the paper and then, jump to conclusions or create confusion. So we wanted to have a conversation with you early. You're definitely, statutorily, you're definitely part of the process, but I think our intention is to involve you much more than just a no vote at the tail end. County Administrator Smith Haynes and I have been having conversations, wanted to kind of take that to the next level. And our commission has said, they're still trying to get their arms around policy development, and then we need to be collaborative. But what I would tell you is, I personally am feeling the sense of urgency of the proposals, the employers, their expansions, their need to hire. And so, with all the work that Lauren has done, we're making a lot of headway, but it's going to be kind of a multi-track conversation for the foreseeable future as we try to pick our way through this.
Mike, I have a couple questions. You have, inside the city, there's some large parcels of land that have already been plotted for construction or residential. Magnolia Hills, I think there's some over at Schilling.
And Stone Lake,
Well, yeah,
Schilling in Ohio.
many parcels. How is this going to impact those developers? I mean, is this going to be something where the next guy that comes along is going to want it too? And how do you pick and choose who gets this, who doesn't get this? And
Yep, that is a really good question. The city commission's had those conversations as well. Magnolia Hills Development Group is similar to the Ryan Addition Development Group, Kelly Dunn, Craig Piercy, the Stone Lake, kind of the same ownership again. So we have similar players that already, kind of know the landscape. The city commission has said that, a lot of times it gets looked at as a precedent, but we view this a little bit differently because of the numbers, like Lauren was sharing. We have some target price points, we have some target number of units that is what we're trying to incentivize, and the other things wouldn't necessarily be expecting the same treatment. The developers of Magnolia Hills and Stone Lake know that. We've had that conversation with them. So I think part of what you'll see come out of our policy is some clear communication that this is very project specific, very housing plan priority specific, and try to be very clear that it's not just a blanket precedent for all projects going forward. The other thing I would tell you is, some of the housing that you're talking about is what we've built on an ongoing basis at a pretty slow pace, but there's that segment of the market has kind of figured itself out. It's the other things that are new products, new risk, price points we're not able to hit that we're trying to focus on. I don't know if that helps.
Can I just add really
Sure.
quick? I mean, for instance, those developers that you're talking about build 30 houses a year at $300,000 to $350,000.
Can you get close to the mic?
Sorry, those developers in those subdivisions you identified typically are developing 30 houses a year, custom built $300,000 to $350,000 homes. And those Schwann's jobs, those Great Plains jobs, not all of them are going to afford a $300,000, $350,000 home. So the price points that need to be incentivized are lower price points, and that gets back to timing too. I mean, you can't, even if you got them at $200,000 house, if it's going to take 10 years, that doesn't really meet the objectives of these timelines we're talking about. So I know in questions that we've been asking the developers, there's kind of a general form that they fill out. It's how quickly are you doing this? What is that price point? And those kinds of questions, Phil alluded to this, and Mike, in the development agreement is where you can get specific about that. Does that help?
it helps, yeah.
Just to be clear, there is no check to be written by Saline County. As far as these incentives are concerned, it is merely a loss of revenue once the building or the structures are built for a period of time.
We wouldn't turn down a check, but we're not asking. Not to be facetious, you're correct.
I'm part of a five-headed monster that needs to look after our budget too.
Sure. Well, in all honesty, that's kind of how when Lauren stressed pay-as-you-go, there's two things that are very appealing to me as pay-as-you-go. Number one, it's putting the risk on the developer rather than, a government entity taking out the loan and then having to pay back the loan. And then it's also, it pays itself out as the performance actually happens versus you make that commitment on the front end, and then if it doesn't perform like you expected it to, we, as the taxing entities, are the ones carrying that load.
Well, I think I would emphasize is, right now, we're talking about these two RHIDs.
Yeah,
But-
so I want to weigh in on that, Lauren. So back to Commissioner Vidrickson's earlier question about how the county can be involved in this. There are these two specific proposals, but then there's this larger policy issue. And so implementation of these going forward in whatever precedent does get set by this and whatever policy is ultimately developed, there are some opportunities for us, because even though we're not writing a check, we are foregoing revenue. And I will point out from Lauren's slides, the county and the USD forego more revenue than the city of Salina does. And so there are policies for RHID in other places around the state, for example, Garden City, where the county and the school district are at the table with the city as part of the negotiation of the development agreement. So that's a way that we could potentially play a role in this, is to actually make sure that whatever gets negotiated with the developer serves the long-term financial interests of the county and the school district as well.
That's a great setup. For my other reminders, 10 years, guys, we need to be in this for the long haul, 10 years. I mean, we can't fix this with two RHID incentive packages. And these are just one tool in the toolbox. And I think we're committed to having this discussion as a community of what these tools look like and how they get applied. But this conversation just doesn't stop here. And I keep trying to remind everybody, because it's sometimes hard to look 10 years out. But the conversation's going to shift and it's going to change and the numbers are going to move around, but we still kind of have to keep our eye on the prize and figure out how we do that, because these are a lot of housing units.
Does this mean that we should be, Phil, and I'm directing it to you, should we be getting somebody at this table?
I think there's certainly, and Mike and Lauren and I have discussed that, and but I would say, the five of you, as you speak with your counterparts on the city commission as they're considering policy, you might gently nudge them in the direction of making sure that there's a formal role for the county in their policy.
Well, I mean, obviously, I heard you say that the county and the school district is putting more on the table than what the city is as far as some of the revenue, and that's why I'm hearing that, and I don't quite understand it just yet, so.
Well, if you look at the numbers that Lauren presented, we assess more in property tax than what the city does on an annual basis, as does USD 305. And so when you talk about giving away $1 of property tax, that share falls more heavily on the county and the school district than it does on the city.
I admit I'm a little slow there, so I caught on.
And I agree, and, we're receptive to being collaborative. It cuts both ways in terms of when we give incentives, your levies are higher than ours. When that economic development gain is finally realized, you see as much or more benefit than we do, whether it's at Schwann's, Kubota, or a housing project. The other thing that Lauren had in her slides that we touched on a little bit is one of the risks that the developers identify is process. And so, when they're choosing a community, a predictable process, which being collaborative is going to be much more predictable than starting an RHID district only to have the county or the school district veto it. That's a risk that if we can make that more predictable, it helps in the negotiations on the front end to get it right the first time, and it helps the developer feel like they are making forward progress and it's worth choosing Salina. And
Like,
it
when-
is
when-
definitely a competition. Some local developers that work in a multi-state region were very tactful about it, but made the point to me years ago, I can build the same product for the same price, if not less, in Kansas City, and I can't fill them fast enough. Salina, I just don't have confidence whether I can fill them. It's purely a risk assessment for them. We're trying to get on developers' radar to make Salina a market to be in, to sustain the growth we have now, and I have every reason to be optimistic that we have another wave of economic development successes that we could land if we can get this figured out. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
To the time frame, Mike, maybe you can have a rough idea, or through your consultants, how long is this process going to take, providing this RHID does go through?
Well, I think we've got that 30 to 70-day window for, the public hearing notice.
I heard
So
that.
I think we're kind of on that clock for the two proposals we have before us. As Lauren mentioned, the developer is going to have a conversation with the city commission next Monday to kind of start to flesh out the framework of a policy. I think the city commission would like a final draft from them at that point, but we're not quite that far
I
along.
saw that
so-
time frame, but I'm looking at the big picture
Oh,
Both developers plan to start construction this fall if possible.
this fall.
I'm sorry, yes. They would like to start construction this fall, and then I would see us having a formalized policy in place by then as well. But that presumes we've entered into RHID agreements with those two proposals. They get started, and we finalize the policy.
Well, I appreciate your optimism. but, I'm sitting here thinking back damn near 4 years to get a lease for an expo center, you know? You sure this not going to turn into another one of those?
I hope not. I mean, it depends on how the negotiations go with the developer, but we've done development agreements on that pace before, so I don't have reason to think that we couldn't.
Thank you.
Mike, has the timeframes, the 25-year and the 10-year on the two different projects, has that already been determined, or is that what the developers are requesting?
That's the developer's request. We've had quite a bit of conversation with them about those terms, and, frankly, the part of what Lauren mentioned in terms of an application process, we've tried to get quite a bit of detail from them to try to verify their numbers, but, the 25-year term, their assertion is they still have more risk on the table than they'd like even after that, and they need the full 25 years, but that would ultimately get
Well, as a
negotiated.
community, there's an expense for those residents. So for 25 years, all the other property tax payers in Salina, Saline County are going to be picking up the tab for those units, and
Yeah, it's
at
not lost
25
on me.
years
We'll be
seems like
plowing snow, we'll be
a
fixing
long window.
Yep.
And one other thing, you mentioned the risk for people to come in and do this. You've shown that there's a need. The need is there. They'd be gone in a heartbeat. I mean, supply and demand right now is very, I don't understand the risk. There's the need. The 2x4 is going to cost the same in Kansas City as it does in Salina, Kansas.
Actually, it won't. That's part of the problem is if supply is more readily available, they're not having to transport it. The other thing is labor. If labor is more available in a certain area, all those things reduce overall project cost. And with an untested market, they could just do it somewhere else and know that they're going to make a profit. And so,
And I don't want to lay it at the feet of lenders, but we, in the 2016 housing study, heard that if we don't have examples of that product in the market, it's hard to get lending to get started, to take on that product. And we're asking them to take on products that don't exist at all in the market, as well as take on things that haven't been done for decades.
so for example, I have a property owner, a large piece of property that's been talking to us, but they don't have a builder. Not recommending anybody, but sent them a list from the Home Builders Association of Wichita. Bigger builders down there do 100-plus units a year kind of thing. and said, this might be a good place to start if you're looking for a builder, and here's the contact information for their executive director, have at it. That person emailed me the other day and said they have talked to every builder on that list, and all of them have told them, I have more work than I could ever imagine, and I can't find enough people to do it. Thanks, but no thanks. So from a supply and demand, I understand the supply and demand model you're saying. We have demand, why don't they supply it? Then there's a secondary supply and demand equation there that is the demand all over and not having enough supply. And so what we're doing is we are trying to compete with those other surrounding scenarios.
I was hopeful, like you, that, we'd have these economic development projects, and, there's been an amount of time since those have become official and have started. There has not been, there's nothing noticeable in the way of development, but there hasn't been, interest. There haven't been inquiries either in terms of developers that say, we want to take advantage of that.
On the single residence, you have a lot of local developers involved in that project. You named 3, 4, 5 of them. So they receive the incentive back through tax abatements, if that's the correct terminology. And what does that do? How does that entice the workforce to come out and work for them? How do you bring them up from Wichita? When it's happening in Wichita, they're still not going to leave Wichita. All you're doing is just lowering the cost for the developer. You're not enticing.
Well, two things, and I refer to it as tax abatement, and I have to reprogram myself. But
Right.
The taxes still are paid by all the parties involved.
Correct.
It's capturing that increment and directing it. And I point blank put that question to the developers, and their answer was that in Salina right now, we're doing 4 houses by a builder, and so they're hoping if they commit to a 2-year plan of 160 units, they can make it worth someone's while to bring framers in from Nebraska, as an example, and set up shop in Salina to start building these products that they, 1 at a time, 2 at a time, it's just not worth their while.
So essentially, they're local, but they're going to have to pull on a new set of resources because the timeline in which they're saying they're going to build 108 units is much faster than the rate they typically build.
But those builders are already busy in the communities they're in. How are you?
I know, it's, part of it's on
I don't know
them
that we
going to
have,
find 'em.
I don't know that we have all the answers. We're trying to respond to, the builders market and what they're saying would make it worth their while to pursue it.
But that is part of the development agreement and why development agreements are important. Because if they're saying we can do this in 36 months, that's what goes in the development agreement. And if they're not able to make that, then we collectively decide, is that project going to go forward? Or does it need to be renegotiated, things like that. So it does at least put those details in there so that those don't get lost in things.
And I would tell you that we've seen that happen, not in housing, but in other construction contract work where a local vendor gets the contract and then finds labor out of Illinois or Texas and brings it in and to backfill the contract that they've committed to.
Well, and sometimes it's them tapping into their network and their resources. And that's enough to bring, somebody from Michigan or somebody from Ohio, things like that, who might, be ready to make that jump.
Thank you.
Well, I will certainly commit to continuing the conversations with the county administrator, and then, as we collectively see fit, coordinating and collaborating with the governing bodies. And I did think of another answer to your question. To Commissioner Vidriks's point, when we're negotiating with the developer, we don't have 2 5-headed bodies negotiating. And so there might be some efficiency there, I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for,
Thank you.
very interesting. It is. And I come back to, it's like, the housing is a shortage, but it's like, it's somewhere in the state, nationally, everywhere, is the people to work. I mean, there's no people. Everybody I know out there is still looking for employers. So it's like, it's yeah, we can build houses, but if nobody's going to move here, it's like, it's a catch-22 deal. It's like, but we will have to have people to come here because we got jobs available. Yep. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Very, very interesting. Any other comments? County Administrator's update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple items for today. For starters, the American Rescue Plan Act. So after putting this on the agenda for probably a month and a half now, the guidance finally came out yesterday. It is 151 pages in length, and the actual rules start on page 129. In addition, there are 37 pages on just how to log into the federal portal to claim our money. So it's going to take a while to wade through all that. I attended a Treasury webinar last night. They didn't offer a lot of specifics, so it looks like I'm going to have to wade through that 151 pages. Michelle Barkley and I did meet with a consultant on Friday. I was supposed to have received a draft contract yesterday. That did not happen. So we're trying to schedule with another consultant for this Friday. One of the things that I will say after skimming through the 151 pages, it's not obvious how much we can spend on administration from the rule that Treasury announced yesterday. Still hopeful that it's the same rules that applied to the CARES Act, but didn't see that specifically. Second item was just a brief budget update. I did meet with all departments regarding their budgets. I've exported what they entered into CIC into an Excel spreadsheet for easier display, and I'm setting up meetings with department heads for your special meeting on June 3rd. So we are on track to go ahead and get you the initial budget proposals by June 1. And then finally, I'll just add that the legislature adjourned over the weekend, and I've been expecting an update from our KAC. There was a last-minute flurry of activity, so I'm hoping by next Tuesday we'll have a little bit clearer picture of what the legislature did when they were on their way out of town. So that is what I have to share this morning.
Okay. Any comments by the commissioners?
I will say that I attended along with Commissioner Vidrickson and County Administrator, the design development work session on the new jail yesterday, and they are moving forward and chipping away at that monster.
Great. Any other comments? We'll move on to item 4. Announcements? Any announcements? Okay, well, we'll be moving into an executive session.
Mr. Chair, staff would request an executive session for 15 minutes under the employer-employee negotiations exception to the Kansas Open Meetings Act to discuss negotiations with the SCAPE bargaining unit, and attendees would include the commissioners, myself, and HR Director Marilyn Leamer.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second.
Second.
Oh, so moved, yeah. Hey, we got a second here now. And it's like, I'll call for a vote. Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Weiss?
Aye.
Commissioner Vidrickson?
Aye.
Commissioner Shadwick?
Aye.
Commissioner Sparks? We will move into executive session under employer-employee negotiations for 18 minutes. We'll take a 3-minute break, and then we'll,
The motion was 15 minutes, wasn't it?
15, but we'll take a 3-minute recess here, and then we'll start in 3 minutes and be in session till 11:12. session. Are there any further comments? No action to be taken at this time. And if there's no further comments, I move we adjourn the meeting.
I second it.
Thank you.